All right, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll count you down.
Okay.
Jump the gun. All right? Got to shake out all that nervous energy.
Okay, in 5, 4, 2,
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, good afternoon. It is Friday, February the 6th, 2015, and now coming to you from an undisclosed location, here he is, the master of disaster, the one that everybody stands up and hollers for. Ladies and gentlemen, the host with the most, Mr. Mandrake.
Well, thank you very much for that nice welcome, Mr. Murdoch. First of all, it's been a pleasure setting all this stuff up. This has been a long time in coming, this moment in the sun. I want to tell you something that I've said to you before many times. What do you think that is?
I don't know.
We're in a lot of trouble in this country. That's what I would like to talk about.
Oh.
You know it, I know it, and the audience out there knows it.
Oh, yeah, we are definitely in deep you-know-what. Yeah.
But I don't want to digress.
And have been for some time.
I don't want to depress the audience out there. We're here now. It's the second month of the year 2015, in the year of our Lord. And what we need to do now is take our country back. But there's so many problems, not just domestically, internationally, but globally. Not just internationally, globally, interplanetarily. We've got problems everywhere. Yeah. There are so many problems. We don't know where to begin. So I ask you, what's on the top of your list?
Now, hold it. Let me correct you on one thing. Intergalactically, now let's not drag other worlds into this.
Yeah, we don't. Even the
Earth is enough of a pill to swallow.
Well, listen, our next week, I didn't want to jump to this right away, but I'm going to have an ancient alien theorist come on the show.
Okay.
And he's going to explain how all this problem seems to occur only on this planet, not on other planets.
Well, see, the way I see it, that's the reason why the alien races, if there are such, haven't come down yet, because they might not want to infect the rest of the galaxy with our stuff.
Mr. Murdoch, first of all, how has your year been? It's been a while since we've done our radio show.
Well, seeing as how the year itself, the new year is only a month old, all things considered, pretty good.
Exactly. Now,
and may I add, this our new undisclosed location is a vast improvement over the other one.
Now, I tend to disagree. Our old undisclosed studio location had more quaintness, charm, and security.
Quaintness. I guess you could call it that.
It was quaint. It had great acoustics, and if you needed to do your laundry,
it was a toilet, ladies and gentlemen.
It was not a toilet. It was a laundry room.
Okay.
All right.
Close enough.
Right. Now, the thing I'd like to discuss today is our new mayor, Mayor de Blasio. What do you think about his performance in the last year? Because we actually were around during the time of his campaigning at the other undisclosed location when we would see him zip back and forth.
Well, the first thing that springs to mind is he's not got a good track record when it comes to snowstorms.
Exactly.
Because remember, right after he took office was when the last snow disaster, hit, and well, he was totally unprepared for that.
Now, wait a minute. This was not his first storm. So last year,
his first storm as mayor.
Wasn't Mayor Bloomberg mayor during the time that there was a strike issue with the Department of Sanitation, and they were plowing the streets of New York City with the plows up about a foot off the streets so that they weren't actually plowing?
No, I don't think I remember that. Remember, remember, I've only been in New York coming up on 3 years. I missed most of the Bloomberg administration.
Excuse me. We are in an undisclosed location which may or may not be in a certain state, either on the west or left coast or here on the east coast.
True.
Here, did I say here? Or wherever we are. We could be in the middle of the country. But we are at an undisclosed location.
We could be in Waxahachie, Texas, for all you know.
We may be there. But the reason we have to be so secure and clandestine is because the opinions that people such as Mr. Murdoch and myself hold are, at least in the eyes of the status quo, those who lead us to the elites, very unpopular and politically incorrect, which means they hate our guts.
We tend to go against the grain a lot.
Well,
politically correct, we're not.
Mr. Murdoch, political correctness is not something that I was raised or immersed in as an adolescent or a child growing up. You're a slightly more mature and seasoned person than myself, just looking at you. I mean, I don't know how old you may be, but you look a little bit more wise and experienced. So tell me, when
Thank you for the compliment, man.
I'm buttering you up.
Checks in the mail.
Thank you very much. I could use it, please. Mandrake, Mandrke. I want to ask you a quick question. When did you first notice creeping liberalism and politically correct speech entering the vernacular, the culture, the body politic, etc.?
As far as I can tell, I would have to say it was sometime right around maybe the maybe early 80s.
The early 80s. Can you give me an example of when you first noticed something change that seemed nonsensical in the way liberals typically try to transform language and culture?
I mean, God, where do I start? I mean...
Was it in the music? Was it in sort of the use of words?
Well, I would say probably in the use of words. Okay,
I see.
Just like, okay, for example, and you and I have discussed this many times in our former location,
right.
How, the word racist gets bandied about now.
Sure.
It's like now, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf. Now, I mean, I remember a time when racist, that word had a certain sting and a certain stigma to it.
Well, I can say, Mr.
And now it's like, if you say the slightest little thing that somebody might get offended by, not even a large group of people might get offended by, you get tagged racist.
And it goes beyond that, but you have to understand the movements of the 1960s, which were socially liberal and liberating, let's say, the feminist movements, the political movements that tried to transform America from a more conservative country to a more center-left country, and then left country, and then now they call leftism progressivism. Let's say that. They try to manipulate the language and modify the language so that words don't mean the same thing anymore. For example, you said the word racist. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, and we grew up in a mixed neighborhood, everyone was cognizant that people were from other places. For example, Italians, Irish, and Puerto Ricans on the corner from me. Yes, that's what we called them. Mm-hmm. The Italian friends of mine, my friend Jeffrey, who used to live in a certain area at an undisclosed location, and but we didn't focus on that. It was almost just taken for granted. Yeah, and the word racism, I don't even think was ever used.
Yeah, pretty much the same. I was raised and born down south, so and we had pretty much the same experience.
I think it was a time of more honesty in terms of if you meant something, you said it. But in the school system, they tried to transform the language. We can go through 100 different examples.
I can give you a good example.
Please do, because I'm blacking out over here, being on at the undisclosed location.
Okay, now. I remember when I was coming up, and as a young man, like in my period of coming up was the 70s and 80s, all right? I remember during that time the word diversity, okay? Mm-hmm. In terms of cultural diversity, it means a completely different thing now than what it used to. As I remember the original meaning of the word diversity, it was all-inclusive, meaning everyone. No matter what your ethnicity, your culture, your race, your nationality, religion, whatever. Everybody's included. Now, I'll say modified version of the word diversity, it pretty much means everybody but white people.
Well, that is an interesting point. That is an interesting point. Now, what I wanted to mention to you about the word diversity, having attended a certain university in my educational experience, it was a very good educational experience at a pretty good school. The word diversity to me actually was in a biological sense. We talked about biological diversity. We talked about chromosomes, DNA. We talked about heredity, right, and things like that. And in fact, one of my professors, I won't mention his name. His name is Professor Hurst. He worked with Watson and Crick. God.
You said you weren't going to mention his name, and he promptly mentions the name.
But he was a prominent geneticist, and I took a class on genetics, and that's where the word diversity really was used quite a bit to talk about genetic diversity.
Right.
When I was attending the university, we didn't have this emphasis, I must say. In fact, I'm rather glad that I don't attend a school now, because the schools are indoctrination centers, as far as I can tell, especially from what I see on television, what I read on the internet from different universities. They really have been taken over by people of the left, of that particular persuasion. But let's change the subject and transition, because we're boring everybody. As you may know, there have been a lot of reports about problems around the world, the most pressing being Middle East violence, the rise of China, the different patterns of open borders, either in Europe or the United States, in Australia, and so forth. And in that sense, I think that we're really fighting an uphill battle in the culture wars, national identity, who we are as a people, and so forth.
Well,
what do you think?
We're getting swallowed up.
By who? By the rest of the world, or by just a way of thinking, an ideology?
Well, I think on the surface you could say by the rest of the world, but I think it's more to the point of, a certain way of thinking. The body politic, so to speak. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, okay, I understand that there were a lot of things in the past in this country that weren't right. Mm-hmm. And a lot of things that should have been changed. But in the effort of doing that, sometimes you can go a bit far. It's like an overreach now, and it's like, okay, we're trying to, we're tippy-toeing our way through things instead of having honest discussions about things.
Well, an honest discussion today,
because we're so afraid of offending someone.
It really, in the pursuit of non-offensive speech, it's dishonest speech. I was mentioning to one of our staff members here at the Mandrake Studio Empire at the Hughes Corporation. I was mentioning to this individual that if there's an old verse that Jesus once mentioned, and I'm not trying to get religious, but it is something that I feel is worth mentioning, and that is, if you mean yes, you say yes, Jesus said. If you mean no, you say no, and anything else is trying to confuse the issue, and it leads to evil. Today, people aren't willing to call things really what they are because everyone has an opinion about what truth is. There is no standard of truth. Now, there is no absolute truth that we can completely know, but we can try to, hedge our bets and say this is a little bit truer than that.
Yeah, try to come to some kind of agreement, basically. But thing about it is,
a cultural standard.
But people aren't willing to have the honest discussion that needs to take place to lead to what the truth is.
Wait a minute, Mr. Murdoch. Don't you think we're having discussions ad nauseum in infinitum? We are talking and discussing and debating, and nothing gets done.
That's because people are talking at one another and not to one another.
But isn't there a point when people should just have a standard of behavior that is generally, like, across the board acceptable or understood as being the norm? Anything to the left is fringe, or to the right may be fringe, but there used to be like a core belief system that wasn't challenged. Nowadays, if you sneeze, somebody's challenging you if you say God bless you.
Well, see, that's the problem. See, everything has become so politicized now. I mean, depending on who you're talking to, I mean, there's people who would politicize the man in the moon being made of green cheese or something,
Speaking of the moon, I mean, I remember growing up at the time that I did, which was at the tail end of the 1960s, we had a war raging in Southeast Asia. There was political chaos in the Nixon administration, the Lyndon B. Johnson administration. The country was on fire. There were civil rights marches and things like that going on. But the one thing you could say that we were still shooting for the stars. In fact, July 20th, 1969, we fulfilled a promise that was made by President John F. Kennedy to land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth. We were shooting for the stars, and there were objectives that were above and beyond our own, like petty differences and squabbling. Now, I mean, we don't even have a space program anymore that can launch an astronaut on our own vehicles up to the International Space Station.
We nowadays we have to hitch a ride with Russia to outer space.
Isn't that something else? While we're bad-mouthing, Vladimir Putin, we're begging him to get on one of his, Soyuz rockets to go up to the International Space Station. It says a lot about how far I think our country has stooped, I think. I don't say stooped in the sense that Americans are cowardly or anything, but our leaders, the people who are leading this country.
The leaders.
They're defying the will of the people, the character of the American people, which is independence. Most people don't want the government breathing down their neck like Nanny Bloomberg did. You can't have a Coke that's larger than a Big Gulp. You can't have too much sugar. Oh, and Michelle Obama, our First Lady, thank you very much, she's starving the kids in the school system by giving them lettuce and, potato peels.
I mean, hey, back when I was in school, I remember we used to have, French fries and fried chicken, and nobody seemed to suffer from that.
I gotta tell you, I used to love the school lunches. One of my favorites was sort of the Salisbury steak with the processed mashed potatoes.
Oh, yeah. Well, God bless the processed mashed potatoes.
Did you ever take a mashed potato, scoop it up with the plastic spork, and fling it into the ceiling? It would stick.
Yeah.
In my lunchroom, it's probably still up there.
And it did the same thing to your ribs.
It sure did.
Right.
Well, speaking of schools, I really think that this whole talk about a Common Core program, which is going to provide universal sort of standards throughout the country, is not a good idea. Because I actually saw the mathematical approach that they use to, like, do different equations. For example, 2 + 2 + 2, 2 + 2 + 2 is not what you think it is, because there's a whole way of thinking that's involved in coming to the answer. Oh, and with Common Core, I don't know if they're still utilizing this, but even if you're wrong, you get credit because you tried. Isn't that something? Imagine if Buzz Aldrin was stepping off the ladder of the lunar lander, and we tried. We think that this is going to happen.
Let's turn it all over to guesswork, ladies and gentlemen. Right.
There are certain.
Let's just throw it out there and hope we get it right.
Well, Mr. Murdoch, and let's look at the our leadership in Washington. Would you have anything you could say about Comrade Obama? I mean, President Obama.
Time out. Wait a minute.
What's the matter?
You just contradicted yourself.
I did?
You used the word Washington and leadership in the same sentence.
Oh, my God. Thank you for pointing that out. Is there any way that we can edit that out?
Yeah, cut that.
Yeah, but no, wait a minute. There is leadership. The leadership is in the opposite and wrong direction. In other words, there seems to be a distorted way of looking at a worldview that's prevalent in Washington. It comes from the top. In a company, look, you know that in our organization, the Hughes Corporation, see, my boss is listening right now. Mr. Hughes,
you sure that's not the NSA? I mean, if we start getting that call the minute you start talking about
Washington.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, remember the last time the NSA tracked us
by
down?
the way, for those of you who don't know, in our former undisclosed location, we used to have to keep our eyes out for the NSA.
Look,
we actually caught one of their undercover vehicles one
I have
day.
photographic evidence of it right now.
Right.
Remember, we were talking, and they were using the Super Bowl as a cover. Mm-hmm. They had their vans with the dishes and everything on top. NSA printed on the side with a big eagle, as if we weren't going to notice that coming out of the studio. I don't think they saw us.
I remember that.
Yeah, I have the photographic evidence. The National Security Agency really is becoming more and more, I think, big brother. Should I say this? And totalitarian. Now, what I wanted to say about the Hughes Corporation, which we represent, you're under contract, but actually I'm family.
Speak for yourself. I don't work for Hughes. I work for Tony Stark.
No, wait a minute, Mr. Hughes. Listen, who do you think Tony Stark was modeled after? Why? What was Tony Stark's father's name?
Howard.
Where does the name Howard come from?
Hughes.
Thank you very much. Case closed. Now let me school you some more, Mr. Murdoch. The leadership is set by the tone of the people at the top. Now, as a successful media personality, international celebrity, and pundit, and also a consultant for various stations that want my opinion, and our
not to
radio.
mention connoisseur of fine adult beverages, I might add. Just in the interest of full disclosure, we have
now wait a minute. In a few minutes, we're going to have a word from our sponsors.
Okay.
Now, what I wanted to say is this leadership is set from the top. In other words, the tone and the culture comes from the person at the top setting it. In other words, if I were the type, now I ran a business, I think you recall, in running a business, what the person in charge does, acts, says, and the culture that he encourages trickles down to the people below him, and they emulate it.
Exactly.
At the very top, and I am talking about Comrade Obama, President Barack Hussein Obama. Now, don't go Hussein, that's his name, Barack Hussein Obama. He's from Hawaii. He was born and raised there. He was part of the Choom Gang. What was the Choom Gang?
What?
The Choom Gang. They smoked marijuana and did coke. That's what I heard. This is well known.
I don't claim to be an Obama expert, but this is news to me.
This comes straight from the Hughes Corporation. We have our sources.
I remember him admitting that he smoked when he was younger. But
look, I'm not bad-mouthing the guy.
The Choom Gang.
Yes, there's a picture of him wearing a white hat with something that quite frankly resembled a doobie cigarette.
I want to see this.
And he was part of a group that hung out in his area in Honolulu, or wherever he was from, Waikiki, and they smoked a lot of marijuana. He admits it. Yeah. Now listen, Bill Clinton had a nose like a vacuum cleaner, but President O, he could smoke up, he could puff up a storm bigger than the stuff that comes out of his mouth, more smoky and more deleterious to your health than the smoke he was ingesting, because he says a lot of bad things. He sets a culture. Everyone from the IRS, former head of the IRS, you remember her name? I forgot her name already. Her name was, what was her name?
Remember, she was me at the moment.
Oh, God.
The one that just recently resigned.
Listen, we have a fact checker in the booth there. What was it? It begins with an L. I forgot her name. Anyway, she was in charge of the IRS, and they were going after conservative groups, namely Tea Party groups. Why? Because they didn't like them. Why? Because they get their cues from the top. If the boss doesn't say, you're the head of the IRS, and you're doing this, I don't like it, I want it to stop, you're going to keep doing it. Because sometimes not saying something speaks a lot about what a person's really thinking and encouraging. He encouraged that. What about this?
And it's not the first time. I mean, you remember going all the way back to the 60s, or the 70s, the Nixon White House enemies list. Okay, so
the Nixon White House enemies list?
Yeah.
Who was on that list anyway?
Well, I don't remember exactly, but it was basically anybody that the Nixon administration saw as someone that was opposed to his re-election.
Look, a lot of people say President Nixon was bad because of the Watergate break-in, which he wasn't orchestrating, but he tried to cover up. The Haldeman cover up, the plumbers and all that. The problem with Nixon was he was loyal to his subordinates who worked for him. He wasn't doing anything that any of these politicians don't do. For example, we have a politician on Staten Island who was elected to Congress, Congressman Grimm. He was elected by the people of Staten Island. He went into Congress, and they got him out on 20 counts of trumped-up charges, saying, and let's face it, the worst thing he did was he maybe, allegedly, perhaps it's been proven or not, he admitted to it, but the charges were that he hired illegal workers in a restaurant that he had 10 years ago before he was even elected to Congress. As if half the people that are out there watching us now don't have illegal immigrants. Can I call them illegals, or do I have to call them undocumented? There goes politically correct speech. You see what I'm saying?
See, you just made yourself politically correct.
I'm not making myself. I'm trying to make a point.
There
are people out there who point their fingers at people who they don't like Mr. Congressman Grimm, former Congressman Grimm, who had to resign because he was hiring illegal waiters and waitresses for a restaurant that he owned. I would challenge anyone out there who's ever had their lawn cleaned, raked, and blown with the wind blowers. If they're not paying people who may not be here with the proper documentation, you know what? So they are being hypocritical about it. And so with Nixon, for example, he was loyal to his people, Haldeman and so forth beneath him. And the worst thing I blame Nixon for doing was essentially traveling to China and making agreements with China, which in retrospect now, some 40 years later, may not be in the best interest of the United States of America, considering now that we're building a militant imperialistic China with American military know-how, which is both being sold and stolen by the Chinese, and we're building a big debt up in the course of building it.
I was about to bring that up. See, it kind of led to, and I don't know if this was the overall intent, but it certainly paved the groundwork for us now being up to here in debt to the Chinese. Well, I mean, let's be honest about it. Okay, you want to throw political correctness out the window? Let's be honest. China owns us.
Yes,
okay?
I know.
Why do you think it is that China will never start a war with the United States? We owe them too much money.
Now, wait a minute. You have to disagree. We may owe them money, but as you may know from, for example, World War I, there's one way that all debts are balanced out and rendered non-transferable, and that's through war.
Yeah.
When a country can't pay its debts anymore, they'll either say, we can't pay the money. What are you going to do about it? Come and take the money, and you have a war, a la World War I, for example, which was a series of alliances based on the assassination of the Archduke, Austrian Archduke over there, Ferdinand. But in World War II, for example, we had the treaty which was so debilitating to the German economy by Versailles. And so many of the debt that was incurred was unsustainable by the German workers, and they became resentful. And 20 years later, we had World War II. Yep. Hitler used that as a reason, one of the reasons for saying that Germany had to really rearm itself. And if you want that money, come and get it. We're not paying it. What are you going to do about it? This can be possible. I don't say the United States is going to do that, but who knows what China might do.
Well, see, it all revolves around money. I mean, let's face it. The biggest reason why the Soviet Union fell apart?
We outspent them.
Well, yeah, we outspent them to the point where they had no money. Their economy their economy was never great to begin with, and it went totally in the toilet because they were putting everything towards armaments so that they could take over the world.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because Ronald Reagan in one of his cabinet meetings says to one of his security advisors, I guess it might have been, Secretary of State, or it might have been Buchanan or one of his other people that was advising him at the time. What do we have that the Russians don't have? And one of them said, we have money. Let's outspend them. And it seemed to be, a strategy that worked.
It worked.
A lot of people won't give President Reagan his props, but he was responsible for the decline of the Soviet Union.
Like my granddaddy used to say, how are you going to take over the world when you're broke?
Yeah, well, he made a good... Now, where did your granddaddy find such pearls of wisdom? How did he acquire it? From age?
Living, having a mind, being able to observe things.
So, in other words, he didn't go to Harvard University like Comrade Obama and learn how to hate America and how to twist left is right and up is down. He learned on his own the right way of doing things because his mind wasn't poisoned.
Through life experiences and having his own mind. And see, Granddaddy was smart as a whip. He wasn't like so many people who, like, get fed information, whether it's true information or misinformation, and run with it. My grandfather was the kind of guy that he would ask questions. If somebody would tell him, well, A plus B equals C, then he wouldn't just say, all right, you're right. He would say, all right, why do you believe that?
So he questioned authority?
Prove it to me. No, it wasn't so much that he questioned authority. He questioned, for lack of a better term, conventional wisdom. Now, if you could,
sounds rather odd.
If you could present to him a plausible case why you think a certain way, then he would think about it, and then he said, all right. He would either make up his mind that you were right or you were wrong. But what I'm saying is, he did not just blindly accept what somebody told him was true and say, all right, I believe it.
Well,
so,
the thing about conventional wisdom is that it's conventional, and typically you don't challenge conventional wisdom because it's conventional, so it's not extreme, and it's wisdom.
And everybody believes it.
And typically wisdom is something that you cherish. You don't challenge and try and tear it down. In other words, like the ancient Greek philosophy of past with Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, I think therefore I am with René Descartes and all these great thinkers of the various centuries, made their points, and certain philosophies can be questioned as a system. But conventional wisdom, I think, is best embodied by the kind of advice, good, solid advice that you would get from the good book. And by that I mean the Holy Bible. And there's a lot of good advice, that is in that book that is what I would say divinely inspired, and it's conventional, and it is wisdom. Wait, see, you talk about religion, and the NSA sends you they're letting us know that
they're not listening. Here. They're not monitoring this broadcast. No way.
Her name was Lois Lerner. That's the woman from the IRS tax scandal. Lois Lerner. She was the head of the department that was charged with granting tax-exempt status to various people who were applying it for it through these different, the tax-deductible charities.
Yeah.
And so
see, the bottom line is,
I just wanted to mention the name Lois Lerner.
Yeah, okay. So the bottom line is this, and this is pretty much the original point that I was getting to as to why I brought up the whole thing with the Nixon enemies list. Whoever is in power at the time is going to take advantage of that power. I mean, and now Obama or whoever was working in his service with the whole IRS enemies list, so to speak, Tea Party, whatever, and all that stuff, they were no more right to do it than the Nixon era people were with their enemies list.
Well, you raise a certain point of integrity.
Either way, it's an abuse of power.
Exactly, but
you try to squash your political enemies, by doing certain things.
Well, I think President Lincoln may have said it best when he quoted this. He said, "If men were angels, we'd have no need." For laws. If men were angels, we'd have no need for laws. True. Men are not angels. By our very nature, we're flawed people. True. And the point is we have to try and rise above our natural tendency to be, with human nature, less than honest, perhaps, having less integrity than we'd like to have. But we have to always try and hold a standard. Yeah. And I think that's something that people today sort of take for granted. Now, if you are in a position of power, you're President Nixon. If I were, let's say, in that position of power, I wouldn't accept this type of behavior. However, if I didn't know about it and it was happening off to the side, I still wouldn't like it if it hit my ear. Look, politics is a dirty business. If you want to be a preacher, be a preacher. You want to be a politician, you're going to be down in the mud and in the gutter with the rest of those people, most of whom are scum, let's face facts. Not all, but most, because you look at all the politicians that go into Congress or the Senate, they go in normal people making a government salary that you and I pay for with our taxes, by the way. Not the people that sneak across the border. I don't know if they pay taxes. But people who work, have a 9-to-5 job, they pay taxes to pay the salaries of these government officials who get elected to Congress or to the Senate or to whatever judicial positions. And what do? They leave millionaires. They leave with their pockets full,
Yeah.
and they are not equal to the people. The Founding Fathers had an idea. You were going to be an agrarian society, let us say at the time. You were going to be elected to Congress. You were going to go and represent your community, and you were going to leave and not be a professional politician like these lawyers, litigators, and professional people who come out of Harvard and Yale and Princeton and screw the country up. Because they're not real people.
And not only that, but back in the early days of this country,
can't stand them.
In the early days of this country, when you were elected to represent your people in the halls of Congress, Senate, whatever, it wasn't a full-time job. Legislature would be in session maybe 6 months out of the year. The remaining 6 months of the year, you go back to your home, your hometown.
Let me ask you a question.
Or whatever, and you went back to being a blacksmith or a baker or
candlestick
whatever.
maker or some kind of a farmer or something like that.
Right.
You weren't a professional politician who was well versed in the art of depriving people of their hard-earned money by using the law against them. Yeah. The laws are there to serve the people, not the people there to serve the laws. And I don't think in this country today that we really are. We're heading in the right direction. I think we're being